Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy little human being, you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we can meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this craziness, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the tragic murder of 38-year-old Robert Limon. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new morbid makeup video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want. They're both Bratterstein, but no pressure. So guess what, guys? Today's video is in partnership with Dossier. Are you familiar with Dossier? If you are not, you're about to get familiar with Dossier. Dossier is a fragrance company that creates luxury scents at a fraction of luxury prices, where a typical bottle of luxury perfume can cost anywhere from $50 to hundreds of dollars. As I always say, how dare they? Dossier's fragrances cost anywhere from $29 to $49, and they offer bulk deals where if you buy 3 or more bottles, you can get up to 25% off plus free shipping. And I know that that sounds too good to be true, and typically if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is, but I promise you, this is true. So I got 2 scents to share with you today, and oh my god, this first one, I can smell it through the box. This one is Spicy Orchid, which is inspired by the Tom Ford Black Orchid A Day perfume. Fancy stuff, expensive stuff. And this smells, it smells hot, like hot, hot, hot. It's like a, it's a very sexy scent, which I'm not like a sexy person like that, but maybe if I wear this, I am. Now the other one I got is Spicy Mimosa, and if you did not know already, now you know I love a mimosa. I'm a mimosa ass bitch, and this one is inspired by the Jo Malone perfume Mimosa and Cardamom. Listen, this one smells so good too. So they're very different smelling scents. I would say that this one is lighter than that one. A little fruitier, a little fresher. They're both kind of spicy, but I feel like this one's like a daytime perfume, whereas Spicy Orchid is like a nighttime perfume, you feel me? Like good. They're both good for their respective times of the day. Like this is for when you're going to work, and that's for when you're going out on a date, you know what I mean? Trying to make somebody fall in love. Or maybe lust. I don't know your life. You do you, boo. Now, for me personally, the best part about Dossier perfumes, besides like the great scents, obviously, is the fact that Dossier is a cruelty-free perfume company where neither Jo Malone nor Tom Ford are. So if you've ever been interested in trying those perfumes, but like you really love animals and you want to be cruelty-free, these are the best option, especially because they smell just as good, they last just as long, and they are a fraction of the price of the luxury perfumes. So it's like the best of all the worlds. Anyways, Dossier is offering members of the Brat Pack 10% off their purchase of their new favorite perfume or candle. They actually do make candles too that correspond with their perfume scents. So they are offering members of the Brat Pack 10% off of any purchase from Dossier for a limited time with the code BRATTERSTEIN at checkout. So I would jump on it because like they're already so affordable, and then you get 10% off, and I can't imagine you're gonna find a better deal out there. That's just my opinion. So make sure to click the link in my description box and use the code BRATTERSTEIN at checkout on your new favorite fragrance today. And of course, I just want to say thank you to Dossier for continuing to want to work with me, because that's cool. I like it. And I want to thank you guys for always being so dope and supporting all my sponsors. You're tight. Don't ever change. Okay, now that I'm done spreading the good word of Dossier, we can get into this case. Now, this is a case that was actually recommended to me by a mutual friend, a friend of a friend. And I don't know if he was recommending this to me to do a video on, or if he was just recommending it to me because he knows I'm interested in true crime and like to read about true crime. So I'm not going to mention his name. But he did personally know our murder victim today, Robert Limon. And clearly, this man's murder profoundly affected him, which does happen when you're very close to a murder. Even if it's not somebody you're super close with, proximity is very powerful, and it can really affect your life. So once he recommended it to me, I started to read about the case. And initially I wasn't even planning on doing a video on it. I was just going to do a little light nighttime reading. Who am I? What's wrong with me? I don't know. But as I continued to read about this case, I found myself enthralled and very, very interested. I found myself so absorbed in this case for 2 reasons. One, where it was located. This was located in a very, very, very small dust bowl of a town called Silver Lakes. And this is a town that like you wouldn't end up in unless you knew it existed. Like you can't stumble upon this place. I lived there when I was in junior high, and then I spent several summers there as I grew up until I was in my late teens, early 20s with all of my best friends. I have a ton of memories there. So it was very interesting to see a case come out of that area. And two, the case is very twisted and messed up and unexpected. You go into it thinking that it's one thing, but when you come out of it, your brain is basically scrambled eggs. And now I'm going to start the case by giving you a quote that will likely paint you very intrigued. The quote was as follows: "It had everything. It had sex, religion, and the seemingly perfect family that had all these secrets." So today I'm going to tell you the whole story, and while I do, I'm going to be putting on a full face of makeup, hence the makeup in a morbid makeup. Now, if that's not really your thing, that's cool. Thanks for hanging out this long. I hope you find a channel that presents this case in a way you prefer. But if you're on the fence, you're not sure how you feel, maybe stick around. You could be surprised by how much you like me. I'm just saying, people are often surprised that I'm a good time. And if you're ever curious about what makeup I'm using, or if you're like, those are cute earrings, where do I buy those? Everything will be listed down below for your convenience. Now, with all of that said, come, gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of 38-year-old Robert Limon. I want to start this case with giving you a quote from Robert Limon's wife. This is to kind of illustrate who it is that we're dealing with here, who the players are, who was lost in all of this. And this is a post that she put online after learning about her husband's tragic murder. She said, and I quote, "Robert showed his love, compassion, hardworking skills, and genuine kindness to everyone he met. I will never let Rob's love die or fade out. I will carry it with me wherever I go and remind our children of it daily as they grow." Robert and Sabrina Limon were a typical married couple living in Silver Lakes, California. They were kind, they were affectionate with each other, they had 2 children, they had pet names for each other, they called each other Bear and Pooter, and they were just known as being very, very affectionate, very loving, very big on the PDA, and just an all-around good, solid, loving couple. The two were known for never fighting and always smiling. Having this perfect relationship with Sabrina was very important to Robert throughout his life. You see, when he was younger, his parents had gotten a divorce, and it had been incredibly hard on him. He watched his family, like the idea he had of his perfect family, just get wrecked right before his eyes, and he spent a lot of time actually being raised by his older sister. And seeing this happen to his family really put something in his brain that made him feel like this is something he definitely didn't want. So later in life, when he was married, he was determined to make sure that his relationship was strong, that it lasted, and that he had, the perfect relationship, the most perfect relationship he could have with his future wife. Robert was known as just being a super nice guy. He was known as being the guy who made friends with anyone and everyone he met. Anywhere he went, he made friends there. He never had a single problem with anybody. He was the type of person that if you ever needed help with anything, no matter what time of day it is, you call Robert, he's going to be there to help you. It doesn't matter. That was just in his character. And he was also known as, on top of being really nice and kind and helpful, he was also really funny and a really good time. So he's the perfect friend to have in your life, because you can have a good time, but he was also reliable. And I find that sometimes you can't find all that in one person. Straight out of high school, Robert moved to Arizona to live with his older sister, Chris. And it was there, in the state of deserts, that he met his future love of his life, Sabrina. He was 21 and she was 18. And as soon as the two got together, Robert was all in. He was head over heels in love. He brought Sabrina home to meet his sister, and he told his sister, bro, I think I'm going to marry this girl. And his sister, Chris, could tell that he was serious from day one. There was something different about this one. The two seemed totally in love, not just with each other, but also with each other's families. And they quickly moved in together and began planning their future. On August 19th of the year 2000, the two decided they were going to get married. Well, they didn't decide they were going to get married on that day, and they got married on that day. That's when they decided. It's not when they decided, but it's when they did. Bring the law into this. So the two were married in a nice, cute little church wedding, and they were stoked. They were in love. They were married. They were getting their future going. Robert had considered, he toyed with the idea of becoming a firefighter, but he decided instead to get a job for the railroad, and he loved his job. He was the type of guy who put 100% of his effort into everything he did, and this job was no different. He worked super hard. He always had fun at work, and he was always like taking selfies with passing trains and just making the best out of every day that he was alive. Eventually, the couple decided that they wanted to settle down, make a life for themselves, and get a home, and they did so in a place called Silver Lakes that was located in Helendale, California, a place that's referred to by some as the happiest place in the high desert, which I have to say, I don't think I would agree. I mean, I haven't been back for many years, probably 12 years, but for me, I've always associated that place with like a lot of pain and trauma, personally. If you've never been there, it's literally in the middle of nowhere. You would just be driving down Route 66. From my direction, I'd be driving down Route 66 for miles and miles and miles into the desert. All of a sudden, on my left, there'd be a splash of land with some houses and stuff, that really, really tiny little town. And before I realized what I was looking at, I would have already passed it, and I would just be going, and I would just be gone. I was there a ton as a teenager. Like, that's where me and my friends, like, I had friends who still lived there, and me and my best friend who no longer lived there, she never lived there, I no longer lived there, we would drive out there almost every weekend, and we would sleep wherever, outside, inside, kind of just depended on what we could do. And there's just like not a lot to do out there, I can tell you that now. All the teenagers ever did that lived there was get into trouble and leave that town to go to closer nearby towns to actually have anything to do. The couple bought a home on a street called Strawberry Lane. How adorable. And it was right next to one of the man-made lakes that are in Silver Lakes. The two went on to have 2 children. They had a son named Robbie and then a daughter named Leanne. And they acclimated well to living in Silver Lakes. They were very friendly and they were very personable. So they made a lot of friends very quickly. And of these friends was another couple, a couple named Kelly and Jason. So Kelly was a hairdresser, and that's actually how she and Sabrina met, because Sabrina had gone to her salon to get her hair done. And once the two met, they really hit it off. So from there, they introduced their husbands to each other, Jason and Rob. And Jason was a firefighter. So this must have been interesting to Rob, considering he had considered being a firefighter. That was one of the professions he had kind of toyed with before ending up working for the railroad. So from there, the group became inseparable. These were like the best friends. They did everything together. They did all the birthdays, all the holidays. They would get together and have like barbecues in the yard and just be like BFFs. And it was them, and then like those 2 couples, and then they were friends with a bunch of other couples, but none were as close as like Sabrina and Rob and Kelly and Jason. Those were like the close ones, but there were a bunch of other couples that got together as well. And this like group, this like crew of adults referred to themselves as the Wolf Pack. I don't know why I was so judgy about that, because like I wouldn't say I'm in a wolf pack at all, but it's a group of 3 couples, my best friends. We just all happen to like, it doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. The end. To get back to the story a little bit and to illustrate what a good guy Rob was considered in the wolf pack, Rob was the guy that all of the guys wanted to be like, and all of the women wanted their husbands to be like. Like, Rob would do something super sweet because he was just like a sweet guy, and all the women would be like to their husbands, like, what the fuck, why can't you be more like Rob? And the guys were just like, fucking Rob, stop making us look bad. But he was just such a good guy that naturally he just made the other guys around him look less than. On August 11th, 2014, Robert Limon celebrated his 38th birthday, and a week later, he was murdered. On August 17th, 2004, Rob was working the day shift about an hour and a half away from his home at a railroad station in Tehachapi, California. At the same time, Sabrina was working a shift at a Costco nearby the couple's home. Once her shift was over, she texted her husband, but received no response, which was odd considering the couple pretty much texted on and off all day. But for some reason today, he wasn't responding. She texted him a couple hours later, a little after 8 p.m., when he had not texted her that he was off work and heading home. And again, there was just radio silence. While all of this was happening, while Sabrina was texting her husband, waiting to get a response and not getting a response, another man, a co-worker who was headed to the railroad site to relieve Robert, to be like the next shift to relieve Robert from his duties, arrived at the location just before 7 p.m. He liked to get there a little bit early and like talk to whoever had been working the night before and kind of see what was going on, if there's anything he should know. So he gets there and he finds the shop's totally closed up, which is weird. It's not something you would do, and it's not something Robert would do specifically. So he goes in, and as soon as he enters the warehouse, he sees that Robert's truck is inside, but Robert is nowhere to be found. So he immediately gets a really bad feeling because it just felt wrong. And as he searched a little farther, his bad feeling was confirmed to be, what's the word? Relevant, appropriate. English is hard. It didn't take this coworker long to realize that his feelings of being uneasy were valid when he stumbled across Robert's body. He was laying on the ground face up with a wound to his head. He had been shot to death. This coworker immediately called 911, and as soon as he did, the dispatcher talked him through how to do CPR on Rob to, attempt to save his life. But as soon as he started, blood started to come out of Rob's mouth. And when the man told the dispatcher this, she was like, okay, listen, she or he, I don't know, was like, listen, stop, go outside, wait for officers to arrive. So he did just that. And once officers did arrive, Rob was pronounced dead on the scene. News of Rob's murder quickly spread through the small town of Silver Lakes because, as I said, this is a very small town. And as soon as the information got to Kelly, Sabrina's really good friend, she immediately rushed over to the house to be with Sabrina. And when she arrived, Sabrina and the couple's daughter, Leanne, were walking around the house, both wearing railroad jackets since that was, Robert's job, and holding a picture of him and just sobbing, which is just really sad to think about. That poor kid, man. I can't even imagine. That poor, it's just a lot. Sabrina's sister was also there. She had gone to be with her sister in her time of need and actually stayed there for a couple of days, and each night laid with her sister Sabrina and just rubbed her back and tried to do anything she could to make her feel like things were going to be okay. But obviously, man, nothing's ever okay after something like that. Meanwhile, while all of that's going on at the house, police are investigating the crime scene and trying to find out what happened. And they discover that 38-year-old Robert had been shot twice. He had been shot while facing his killer, once in the chest and once in the chin. A computer had been stolen from the warehouse, and the warehouse was totally ransacked. Drawers were open. Everything was thrown out all over the floor. So it looked like a burglary, but police were immediately suspicious of this because they're like, a burglary way out here? What are the odds of that? This is out in the middle of nowhere, and these places aren't exactly known for having a lot of money or valuables on site. So why would somebody target this place as a robbery, right? And on top of that, Robert's wallet was still on his person. So they were like, that doesn't seem to be consistent with the robbery. And on top of that, they found that there were no shell casings on the ground. And generally speaking, if it's a random burglary, you tend to find those on the ground. When you don't find those on the ground, it's because somebody who may know the person and may be linked to the person has killed the person. So it's personal, so they pick up the casings to not be traced. So now police are operating under the idea that somebody was there to kill Rob specifically. But when they talked to his wife, his coworkers, his friends, police were again stumped. No one had a bad thing to say about Rob. They said he was a stand-up guy, a good friend, someone you could count on for literally anything, and no one that anyone knew had any issues with him. He was a loving husband, a wonderful father, and there were no known skeletons in his closet. He and his wife were faithful, no affairs that anyone knew of, and they were the perfect family. He was so loved that the railroad company even put out a $100,000 reward for any information on what happened to Rob. And of course, this is always helpful because as soon as they put out that $100,000 reward, leads started pouring in. Lots of leads came. While the leads were pouring in and police were going over those leads and rifling through them and trying to find out what was credible and what wasn't, looking into all of them, police were also looking over the evidence found at the railroad station. And of this evidence was a surveillance tape. And when they watched the surveillance tape, they noted that there was a man who had arrived at the warehouse area who had a limp. And when they spoke to everyone who was there and who would know who was supposed to be there, no one could identify who this man was. 2 days after the murder was August 19th, 2004, and this was actually Rob and Sabrina's wedding anniversary. So instead of the two celebrating their love together, celebrating the 14 years they had been together, Sabrina, her kids, his coworkers, his friends, everybody who cared about him was instead gathering together to go to his memorial service. And it was a very, very sad day, as I'm sure you can imagine. Rob's son, who was named for him, Robbie, spoke at his service about his dad and the loss, and just, I can't even get into it. It'll break my heart into a million pieces. And Sabrina was so upset that she couldn't even bring herself to speak. So police end up getting their first lead when they get a tip that came in based on the surveillance footage that they had found. Somebody thought they knew who was in the surveillance footage that showed the man with the limp at the railroad yard. And this led police to a man named Josh, a young man named Josh. And when they looked into him, they were like, oh shit, I think we got something here, because they found that Josh had a light criminal record. So they bring Josh in. They question him. They take casts of his shoes that he was wearing, and guess what? The casts of these shoes match the footprints that were at the railroad yard, the warehouse yard, like in the dirt around, there's footprints found, and these shoe prints matched. Now, it's worth noting that this guy, Josh, was known to, for whatever reason, frequent that area. He was seen walking around there often. That's actually how somebody ended up calling him in the first place, because he was somebody who was known to be there. But either way, they were like, hell yeah, these shoe prints match. So they question him, and he gives them an alibi. He says he was at home with his parents. Now, police speak to his parents, and they corroborate this, and they were actually able to determine that his alibi was true. So they had been like, hell yeah, this is tight as fuck, we got something, to immediately being like, well shit, we don't have shit. Well shit, what are y'all doing? I have to imagine that happens so often in investigations where, like, you think you find somebody and you're like, this is it, this has to be it, and then it turns out it's not it, and you're like, well shit, now what do we do? Like, we just got our first break and now we have no breaks. The next tip that came to police came to them from a gunsmith, so somebody who like works on guns. And he calls police and he tells them that this guy had contacted him, right? And that this guy had wanted him to replace the firing pin in his gun because it was having trouble shooting. And from what I looked into online, this is like a very strange request. It's not like a piece of a gun that is generally replaced. So this struck the gunsmith as odd. So police go, they look into this, they investigate this person, and they're even able to take the gun and test the bullets from that gun against bullets that were recovered from Rob's skull. But when they checked this guy too was not a suspect, and the bullets did not match. So now police are moving on to wanting to re-review surveillance tapes. Not just the tapes that they had, but they wanted to review other surveillance tapes in the area of like other businesses, other private residences, to see if they could see all cars that were coming in and out of that area. So they did. They got a bunch of different surveillance tapes, and they start looking into all the different vehicles that had been coming into the area. They needed to account for every single one, find out who was driving this car, what business they had being out there, since it was out in the middle of nowhere, and go through each and every one and exclude them from their list. So they do. They go through every single vehicle that showed up, and at the end of this, they realize that every single vehicle was somebody who was supposed to be there and was accounted for, except for one, a motorcycle. The only issue with this is that police could not tell from the footage who was on the bike, a license plate, anything, who was on it, why they were there, and nobody was coming forward as claiming to be this person. So they were like, there's a good chance that the person riding this motorcycle is the person who was either involved in the murder or definitely may have seen something based on the time that they were there. The first massive actual helpful lead came in this case about 2 weeks after Rob was murdered. And this was when Rob's good friend Jason, you remember Jason, Kelly, Rob, Sabrina, they were all super close. Well, his friend Jason received a very strange phone call. Well, not a phone call. It was a phone call, but he received a very strange voicemail on his phone. And this voicemail was from a man that he knew, a mutual friend named Jonathan. Now, Jonathan used to work with Jason at the fire department, for reference on how he knew him. And on this voicemail, this man Jonathan, his name was Jonathan Hearn, was saying that he had the weight of God crushing down on him, and that he felt like he needed to apologize. He said that he'd like to speak to both Jason and Kelly and apologize to them for whatever pain he may have caused them. Now, who the heck is Jonathan? We're just now learning about Jonathan. Jonathan Hearn was a young dude at only 24 years old. He was known as being a kind guy, a gentle guy, one of 6 children raised in Hesperia, California, which is only about 40 minutes-ish away from Silver Lakes. He and his siblings were raised in a very religious household. They were devoutly Christian and they were homeschooled. After he graduated from high school, he had gone on to go to the fire academy. And once he had finished, he had become a firefighter, which is, what happens when you go to the fire academy, I guess. And this is where he met Jason. He had worked with Jason at the fire department and was a paramedic and was super good at his job. And he was just known as being a really bright guy. Now, this is going to seem random. It's not, I promise. But I don't know if any of you are familiar with firefighters or if any of you have ever worked at a grocery store near a firehouse. But if you have not, I'm going to give you some information. It's super, super common for there to be a couple of firefighters that are assigned the duty of going to the grocery store and buying a shit ton of stuff for the firehouse. Because, these guys are there like 24 hours a day, several days of the week. They do very long shifts. So they basically eat, sleep, live at the firehouse. So it's not uncommon for somebody to come in, buy a bunch of groceries, take it to the firehouse so that they can cook while they're there, right? So that they can cook for everybody who's there. I worked at Food for Less for several years, so that's the only reason I even know about that personally. Anyways, Jonathan was one of the firefighters who did this while he was working with Jason. And the grocery store that Jonathan frequented and would buy all the grocery stores for the firehouse was Costco. Now, who do we know from this story that works at Costco? That's right, Sabrina, Rob's wife. Oh yeah, things are getting a little too spicy for the pepper. Now, Sabrina and Jonathan had met at Costco in October of 2012, and the two had really hit it off, with Jonathan even asking for Sabrina's number and Sabrina willingly giving it to him. At the time, he did not know Sabrina was married because she doesn't wear a wedding ring to work. I can't remember why. I think either you're not allowed to or her finger swelled. I think maybe you're not allowed to at Costco, which seems weird, but either way, she didn't wear a wedding ring at work. So Jonathan didn't know. And once he found out she was married, he was definitely apprehensive because he was a good Christian boy, and this went against all his values. Initially, apparently, the two just tried to be friends, but this was proving to be impossible. The two just had too strong a chemistry, and Jonathan was finding himself to be just like so entranced by her. Jonathan was kind of, because he was like homeschooled and sheltered, he had never really had a serious girlfriend before Sabrina, so when this kind of started, it was all encompassing for him. Sabrina was all encompassing for him. So it didn't take long for the relationship to progress, even though he's a good Christian boy and he shouldn't be doing this. They started having an affair by the end of 2012, which, they met in October, so it didn't take them long to give up on those morals and values. And shortly after beginning their affair, they were already saying they loved each other. Now, Sabrina's friend Kelly said of this time, she's been very vocal since all this happened. She's done a lot of interviews. And she said during this time, after Sabrina and Jonathan had met, that the wolf pack, remember all these older couples, had been having a party, and that Jonathan happened to be there. And that, Kelly knew that Jonathan and Sabrina had met at Costco because Sabrina mentioned it at one point. She didn't tell Kelly that they were, having an affair, but she had mentioned, I met one of Jason's friends at Costco, blah, 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 blah. So she knew they had met. So when Jonathan was at the party, she called Sabrina over and was like, oh my God, come over here. It's your Costco friend. They're all drinking and shit. And when Sabrina came over, she was very, very strange. Normally she'd be the type that if she ran into somebody she knew, she'd be like, oh my God, I'm so excited to see you. Hugs, kisses, love, love, love. But when she ran into Jonathan, she was really standoffish and oh, cool. Nice to see you. And kind of seemed like she wasn't really surprised to see him there. And at that point, Kelly remembers being like, oh shit, there's some weird energy between you two motherfuckers. What's going on here? And that's when she first kind of got a vibe that something was going on between the two of them. From that party on, Jonathan continued or started trying to weasel his way into the group circle of friends. He started wanting to be part of the wolf pack, even though he wasn't in a couple. And it started kind of innocently. He would text Jason. This was his point of contact. And he would text Jason pretty often, wanting to get together with him, wanting to get together with the group. But eventually it got to be excessive with him texting almost every single day. And Jason was kind of getting like, what the fuck is this guy's problem, man? Like he wasn't super into it. And it came to a big head one day when Jonathan texted Jason and was like, listen, bro, like I really need you to just give me your friend Rob's phone number. And this set off little alarm bells in Jason's head. I'm assuming that Kelly had mentioned to Jason the weird interaction between Jonathan and Sabrina, and that's why it set off alarm bells in his head. But either way it did. So he like contacted Jonathan and was like, listen, like what the fuck's up? Why do you need his number? What's going on? And this is when Jonathan let Jason in on a secret that he had been holding in for a while. This is when Jonathan told Jason that he, 24-year-old Jonathan, was having an affair with 33-year-old Sabrina, and that it could no longer sit on his conscience because he felt too bad about it. When Jason found this out, he was fucking pissed, and he actually went to Rob. I guess, I don't know if Rob was at his house or if he just went over to Rob like right away, but he goes to Rob like really freaked out and scared about how Rob's gonna react. He thinks it's gonna like blow up. And when he tells Rob like, hey, Jonathan's having an affair with Sabrina, like Sabrina's not being faithful, he was surprised to find that Rob like knew. Apparently Rob already knew. He had found some texts on Sabrina's phone and had confronted her about him. And the two had talked. She had told him what had been going on. He wanted to know like what was so good about this guy that would make her do this to him. And I guess he had even called Jonathan and spoke to him at that time, and was like, listen, I need you to like stop effing my wife. And whatever Rob said to Jonathan did work. It did resonate with him. He said that he felt torn because he loved Sabrina and he wanted her to feel loved by both him and by God, because he's very religious. But that he couldn't bear to hurt or disrespect her wonderful husband. But as I'm sure you can imagine, this split didn't last very long, and shortly thereafter the two were already continuing their affair, back and better than ever, and calling their love for each other and their affair God's plan. So anyways, there's Jason standing there before Rob, Jonathan on the line waiting to speak to Rob. And Rob agrees to talk to him. And I guess Jonathan admits again that the two are still having their affair. And after the two talked, things were okay. Things kind of went back to normal. Jonathan stopped seeing Sabrina. Jonathan stopped calling Jason incessantly for him to be part of the group. Everything kind of went back as being cool as a cucumber, or so it would seem. About a year after that event, after that famed phone call where Jonathan said that he'd stopped seeing Sabrina and Sabrina said that she'd stopped seeing Jonathan, Kelly was out shopping. She had gone to Costco to go shopping, Sabrina's work. And what does she see? But Jonathan and Sabrina hanging out together, standing too close for comfort, chatting up a storm. So Kelly sees them. Sabrina sees Kelly see them. And she can clearly see that Kelly is pissed. She looks at him, and he looks at her, and she looks at him, and he looks at her. Anyways, Kelly, pissed, leaves Costco, goes home, tells her husband Jason, guess what I just saw? Jason calls Jonathan, pissed as fuck. Like, what are you doing, dude? Like, what's wrong with you? And Jonathan says, like, no, man, you got this all wrong. We're just friends. We have a spiritual connection. It's nothing like that. And Jonathan's like, I really don't give a fuck what you're saying right now. Okay? You had an affair with this woman. You had an affair with my friend's wife. You ruined their relationship. You caused damage to their family. You need to fuck off and go. And this is when Jonathan again agrees that he will. But spoiler alert, he doesn't again. So now we're going to fast forward a couple months. Rob has been murdered. Sabrina and her family are in mourning. This is just 2 weeks after Rob was killed. And Sabrina gets a knock on the door. And guess who's there? Effing Jonathan, dude. And he's just standing there outside her door, and he's not alone. Well, he's kind of alone. He brought with him a giant bouquet of flowers for Sabrina. And these were not just normal flowers. These were the same flowers that were in Sabrina's bouquet when she married Rob. Along with this, he brought a note where he had written all about Rob and what a good man Rob was, what like a good husband, good father, good person he was, and how he wished he could be half as good of a man as Rob was. Just weird shit, dude. And Sabrina read this letter to Kelly, to her friend Kelly, and Kelly was like, that's fucking weird, dude. Like, that's super weird. But Sabrina didn't really seem to think it was weird. She thought it was cute and it was sweet. Now, Kelly doesn't think this is so cute and so sweet like Sabrina did. And when she told her husband Jason, he didn't think so either, especially combined with this weird voicemail. It kind of got his wheels turning, and he was like, could this be Jonathan? Could Jonathan have wanted Rob dead? Like, who else? He's having an affair with her. He brings this weird letter. He sends this weird voicemail. Like, I don't know about this. So he actually goes to police and he tells them his suspicions, and he lets them listen to the voicemail. But once they listen to the voicemail, they're kind of like, you know, to me, it doesn't sound like he's admitting any fault about murder. It sounds like he feels bad for sleeping with Rob's wife, especially now that Rob's been killed. So to us, this doesn't really seem like it holds any weight. And once police say this to him, he kind of starts second guessing himself and thinking that maybe he's wrong. He's like, why, you know, I know I had just thought like it must be Jonathan, but like, why would it actually be Jonathan? Like, why would he kill Rob? He's a young dude with his whole life ahead of him. Why would he murder somebody for this older woman with 2 kids? It doesn't make sense. Now, to me, I think the reason that police brushed by this affair theory so quick is because they had already learned something about Rob and Sabrina's relationship that kind of put a thought into their head that this wouldn't have been that big of a deal. And that's that they discovered that at least some point in their relationship, Rob and Sabrina had an open marriage. They had kind of been swingers, and they had invited other people, other couples, into their marital bed. So they were thinking like, okay, if that's okay, then her having an affair with this guy like doesn't really seem to matter, because if he's down with this one thing, he's probably down with the other thing. You know what I mean? If he's cool with like being swingers, he's probably fine with her having an affair. And I know that that's not everyone's cup of tea, that sort of relationship dynamic, but this was an arrangement, an open relationship that the two had, and they were down with this sickness. Now, as time went on and there were no new leads presented and they were kind of stumped, they did start looking closer at Jonathan Hearn. And when they did, they found that like, besides the whole having an affair with a married woman thing, he was kind of a choir boy. He had no record, he had nothing going on. But despite that, there was something about him that kind of did jump out at police and made them go, huh, maybe we should look into this guy. And that was that he had a gun registered to him that was the same caliber as the gun that had been used to murder Robert. And on top of that, he also had a Yamaha motorcycle, a Yamaha bike, registered to him as well. The same kind of bike that was seen on surveillance at the murder scene at the time that Robert was killed. So now police are like, did we look past this man too quickly, perhaps? Perhaps we did. And on top of that, the police and Jason weren't the only people who had some weird feelings about Jonathan. Apparently, Sabrina's sister, who had been there ever since Rob was killed to help her sister, had a weird feeling about Jonathan since he first started coming over to the house, because he came over like right after Rob was killed, and he didn't stop coming over. He was there all the time. He was there all the time, spending time with Sabrina, spending time with Sabrina's kids, cooking food in the family's kitchen. That was Rob's territory when he lived there. So this was all putting a real weird taste in her mouth as well. She felt like he had been overstepping, and she felt like there was something weird going on. So police start looking at surveillance cameras on the route that one would take from Hesperia, California, which is where Jonathan lived, to Tehachapi, California, which is where Rob was killed. So they start looking at surveillance cameras on the route that one would most likely take if they were going from Hesperia to Tehachapi or vice versa. And bingo, they get some very interesting thing on the surveillance. They see a man stop at a gas station that would be on the way from Tehachapi back to Hesperia about an hour after the murder occurred, and it was a man with a limp on a motorcycle. The man was seen going into the gas station, still wearing his helmet, so you couldn't see his face, unfortunately, He walks in. He notices that there are surveillance cameras that are looking right at him, and he quickly leaves, gets back on the road, headed back in the direction of Hesperia. So at this point, police do believe that the guy they're seeing on the video camera is Jonathan. So they get warrants to look at his cell records. And of course, when they look at his cell records, they see numerous texts between Jonathan and Sabrina, which makes sense because the two were having an affair. It then shows that 4 months prior to the murder, the text just stopped between the two of them because, again, the affair had stopped. But what they noted that was kind of weird is that Jonathan was the type of guy who was always on his phone. He was one of our generation, if you're my age or younger, always on his cell phone. And at the time of the murder, the day of the murders, the activity on his phone was super, super low. And at the time that the murder took place, there was zero activity, so his phone wasn't pinging anywhere. Police did see that the day after the murder, Jonathan was very active on his phone again, and in the several days following the murder, Jonathan was very active on his phone again, and that the number he was contacting was a number that nobody recognized. It wasn't anybody that anybody knew. And when police looked into it, they found that this was a burner phone number, and they were like, okay, this is hella fucking suspicious. Like, that's really, really weird. So they get a warrant for a wiretap. Wiretap? Yeah. Like, they tapped that phone. They tapped his cell phone so that when this burner phone called in, they could listen in and see who was on the other end. And boy, once they listened in, this case broke wide fucking open. As police listened in, they recognized the voice on the other end of the phone as that belonging to Sabrina Limon. Obviously. Right? Did you see this coming? I tried to make it more secretive throughout the case, like as I was telling it, but like, did you see it coming? Let me know down below if you did. But anyway, Sabrina and Jonathan were talking about how much they loved each other and how much they needed each other, and he was calling her his girl, and they were talking about their future and how them being together was God's plan. They would also talk about the investigation and how they were really nervous and really scared about how it was progressing. They were pretty sneaky about it, but they talked about it, but they never said anything incriminating, like directly on the phone at first. And this baby is stealing my oxygen, as always. Sabrina would even call the police to get updates on the case. And when they told her, like, we have nothing right now, like, sorry, we have nothing, because police are being really sneaky, even though they were kind of suspecting her, she would then call Jonathan, and the two would be very, very happy that nothing had been found. And the two were very religious, as I said, so they would talk about their sins, and they'd talk about how they felt like the worst people in the entire world and felt so guilty about something. They also talked about the story of Bathsheba and how their relationship was just like that of King David and Bathsheba. And apparently in this story, King David sees Bathsheba bathing naked on a rooftop and is overcome with lust. Knowing she is married, King David has Bathsheba's husband sent off to the front lines to die. That way the two can finally be together. King David, then married her and repented his crimes to God, and God was like, "You good, my boy. All's good. This is my plan." Jonathan prayed with Sabrina on the phone about this, saying, and I quote, "It's our conscience that bothers us when we realize the dirty, rotten people that we've been. And God, we're sorry for that. Amen." One time, while police were listening in real time to Sabrina and Jonathan talking on the phone, the detective texted Sabrina and sent her a picture of the motorcycle with the man on it and was like, "Hey, we think this might be the guy. Do you have any idea who this is? Does this look familiar to you?" And when she got that text, she read it to Jonathan, and the two then began praying. 3 months after the murder, both Jonathan and Sabrina were arrested for the murder of Robert Limon. And in November of 2014, Jonathan pled not guilty to the murder. The case against him was entirely circumstantial, but at least there was a case against him. Sabrina, however, ended up being released just 2 days after her arrest because the DA decided there was not enough evidence present to charge her with a crime. Police could feel it in their bones that this bitch was involved, but they had no proof. There was no evidence tying her to the crime scene, and even though they had listened to hundreds of hours of phone call audio through the wiretaps, she had never once admitted to anything or even alluded to knowing that Jonathan was responsible. They even questioned her extensively, but she never gave any indication that she was involved, and she denied everything. Once Sabrina was released, pretty much all of her friends turned on her. They all believed that she was responsible, and they thought that she was essentially getting away with murder. And she could not go anywhere and escape this because, as I said, Silver Lake's small as fuck. Everyone knows everybody. Whew, she couldn't go anywhere without getting the that's her looks. That's the bitch that murdered her husband is getting away with it. So she ended up pulling her kids out of school and putting them in homeschool. And eventually, after getting tired of constantly feeling like she was hated and responsible and just like the repercussions of her actions, she ended up just up and moving to a whole new location. So to those who knew her and to those who knew Rob, it seemed like Sabrina was getting away with murder. That was until she wasn't, because just weeks before Jonathan's trial, 2 years after Robert's murder, Jonathan decides, I need to stop protecting Sabrina. So he calls up police and he's like, hey, I think I'm ready to talk now. Obviously in exchange for a little leniency, because like my trial's coming up, but I've got some information on Sabrina that I'd very much like to share with you. The police were like, oh fuck yeah, we'll be right there. Jonathan then told police that though he had murdered Rob alone, he had committed the actual murder alone. He was the one who shot him. Sabrina was a huge part of it and had taken part in planning the entire thing from the very beginning, and it was her idea. He said that Sabrina did not want to be married to Rob anymore. Sabrina wanted to be with Jonathan, but the divorce was not an option for her. She said that she would rather roll the dice on a murder charge than live with the shame and stigma of having a divorce that came from an affair. And she said that she thought her kids would have an easier time dealing with the murder of their father than the divorce of their parents. And on top of that, she had said that this was actually kind of merciful because Rob would rather be dead than be divorced because he was so into having the ideal, perfect family. And it also didn't hurt that Sabrina would get $300,000 from his life insurance if he was killed, and that she would get survivor's benefits if he was killed on the job. So Jonathan came to an agreement with the DA, with prosecution, with whoever you come to agreements with. And essentially he would plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter as opposed to murder, and he would testify against Sabrina at her trial. And initially with his first charges, he was facing life in prison with no possibility of parole, and with pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter, which is what he was being given, he would be out in less than 25 years. Now, those who loved Rob were really, really split on this decision because this man, Jonathan, who point blank shot Rob in the chest and in the face, would be out by the time he was 50 years old, and that seemed like a giant injustice. However, police did not believe that they'd be able to get Sabrina at all. Like, she would just get away scot-free if they didn't take this deal, so they decided to take it. And after this deal was made, police drove to Sabrina's new home, which is about 100 miles away from her home in Helendale, where she had lived with her husband, and she was arrested. And at the time she was arrested, she was so confused because she was actually scheduled to go and testify at Jonathan's trial against him, and now police were there early arresting her. And she's like, what is going on? But she was arrested. Sabrina's hearing started on September 11th, 2017, and during Jonathan's testimony at Sabrina's trial, he told the court of their relationship, of meeting her at Costco. He said that the connection was immediate and that the two bonded over a connection that, though was sexual, wasn't only sexual. It was spiritual. The two talked constantly, and eventually Sabrina told Jonathan how unhappy she was in her marriage. That the two had an open marriage and she wasn't happy with it. She wasn't happy with the way Rob treated her. Her pain and unhappiness with the relationship made him hate Rob and think that Rob was a bad person. And the two started talking at that point, talking about murdering Rob. First as a joke, but eventually it got serious and they actually started to plan it. They were going to kill Rob and then get married and continue living their lives together. He said that Sabrina wanted her husband gone and wanted to marry Jonathan so that she could give her kids, quote, godly parents. So the two put their plan in motion. They had actually tried to kill Rob earlier in 2014. They had come up with a totally different plan that didn't involve shooting him at work. And this plan was to poison Rob with arsenic. So Jonathan purchased some arsenic on the interwebs, I think. And he asked Sabrina, like, what could I mix this in that your husband will just not be able to resist? And she's like, oh, banana pudding, vanilla wafers. So he did just that. He made a big batch of banana pudding with vanilla wafers, and he mixed arsenic into this pudding. He then gave it to Sabrina so that Sabrina could then put it in her husband's lunch so he could take it to work, he could eat it, he could die. And she did just that. She packed him some lunch, she packed him some vanilla wafer banana pudding, and sent him on his way to eat it and die. But that day, while they were waiting, they started to panic. They started to worry that they weren't going to get away with this. They started to worry that they would get caught doing it this way. So they decided to call it off. And Sabrina actually texted her husband and was like, oh my God, don't eat that pudding, bro. Those bananas went bad. It's going to make you sick. And I guess he threw it out. I don't know if I would have thrown it out. I would have been like, bad bananas? Sounds to me like super sweet banana bread type bananas. I'm going to eat this really sweet pudding, but I guess he didn't do that. At this point, the duo decided that they wanted to wait a while before trying again because they realized that prior to this attempted murder, they had been texting and calling each other a whole lot. So if they had gone through with the poisoning, police could have connected the two of them as having an affair because of how much they spoke. And it could have looked suspicious for them. So they wanted to wait a couple months, get Sabrina a burner phone so that once his death was finally completed and investigated, they wouldn't have proof that the two had been talking. So it would be less likely that the two would be linked together as a murder conspiracy duo. Which, man, that's so much like planning and forethought. Like, it's so premeditated that they're like, okay, let's wait a couple months. Let's get a burner phone so that police can't see that we've been talking to each other all this time. And we'll talk through that, and then we'll kill him, and it'll look like we haven't talked in forever, so there'd be no reason why we would kill him for our affair. It's just, like, really gross how much they thought about this. Oh, and speaking of really gross, if you want to fucking hate these people even more than you already do, which I don't know how that's possible, but let me just tell you a little story about the banana pudding poisoning that's going to piss you off, okay? It's going to piss you off. When Jonathan was going through with making his arsenic pudding, he wanted to test his ratios to find out the lethalness of the batches he was making, right? So he took some of this concoction he made, he put it on some meat, and he fed it to a neighbor's dog. A dog who had, quote, caused him some considerable issues in the past. And this dog died. Fuck this guy. Fuck this guy. So anyways, the two continued planning for months, and by August of 2014, they were ready. They had their plan set. Sabrina was going to contact Jonathan and let him know when the perfect time to kill Rob would be so that he would have an easy time getting in and out, knowing that Rob was at a certain location and was by himself. And that's actually why Jonathan was even able to kill Rob that day, because Rob was actually not even supposed to be the person working that day. He had gone in for somebody else. So that's just really, really fucked up. But anyways, he then got the word, this is where you need to go. He got a mask to cover his face. He changed the colors on his bike, his Yamaha, with some reflective tape so that if it was seen, the colors would look different and it wouldn't look like his bike. And then he faked a limp for any cameras that might see him. He went to the warehouse, and when he got there to the death scene, he says that he started to panic a little bit and started to think that maybe this wasn't the best idea. And he said of this, and I quote, "Obviously, there's some apprehension at the thought of senselessly taking someone's life." Anyways, before entering the warehouse where Rob was killed, he stood outside, Jonathan did, and prayed about it. He then entered the warehouse where he confronted Rob and shot him once in the chest with the gun he brought, along with a homemade silencer, and Rob fell to the ground. Jonathan then went through the warehouse and started staging the burglary, ransacking all the drawers, pulling everything out, throwing things all over the place, grabbing the computer to make it seem like somebody had gone there to rob the place. And on the way out, he saw Rob on the ground, and he thought to himself that Rob may still be alive, so he shot him in the face to finish the job. And once he left, he called Sabrina and let her know that the deed was done and things had gone A1, baby, according to plan. The defense did their best to discredit Jonathan. They talked about his plea deal and how much he stood to gain from making up a fake story about Sabrina and claiming that she was involved when she wasn't. They tried to discredit the arsenic banana pudding story, saying that it made no sense that Sabrina would bring home poisonous pudding to keep in her fridge where anyone, including her kids, could eat it. They also, the defense, tried to discredit Kelly, Sabrina's friend, who was pretty vocal about the fact that she believed that Sabrina was responsible. They put her on the stand, and he put her on the stand and he made her admit that Kelly and Jason were having a sexual relationship with Sabrina and Rob. They had been swinging together. That's why the couples were so close. And that because of that, Kelly was in love with Rob. And that's why she was making up stories about Sabrina. Now, for me, I'm like, that seems a little desperate on the defense's part. Like, I don't know. It just seems so, like, it just seems in bad taste to me. It feels weird. Like, I get it. She was testifying against Sabrina and saying that she believes Sabrina did it and told the police about all these weird interactions and weird things. But it just seems kind of desperate for the defense to be like, well, you guys were all fucking each other, right? So you must have fallen in love, and that's why you're saying this now. Like, it just seems odd, but that's just me. Maybe there's more to it that you guys might see, but to me, I'm like, okay. The defense also ended up putting Sabrina on the stand to testify on her own behalf, which is not something that we always see. And during her testimony, she talked about Jonathan, and she talked about her attraction to him and how she was attracted to him because he was unlike anybody else that she had ever known, that he was a good man and a godly man, and that the two were connected spiritually, and that she was just so unhappy in her marriage, and that she was ashamed of her swinger lifestyle, and that Jonathan would never have made her do that. She said Jonathan was intelligent and safe and strong and God-fearing, and that he simultaneously controlled her and made her feel safe at the same time because he always had and was quoting and reading to her the Bible. She told the court that she was in love with Jonathan, but that she was in love with her husband too. And that she wanted to be with Jonathan, but she didn't want to be with Jonathan at the expense of losing her current life and her current husband because she loved them both. And by having Rob alive and in a relationship with her and having an affair with Jonathan, she was basically having her cake and eating it too. She was living the best of both worlds, so why would she want to change that? She denied ever poisoning her husband. She denied having any involvement in the murder. She denied knowing that Jonathan had any involvement in the murder, and she told the court that if she had known that he was involved, she would have never had him around her or her kids. The prosecutor on this case said of this case and of Sabrina, and I quote, "This is not a case of he said, she said. This is a case of he said, she lied." It took the jury less than 7 hours to come back with their verdict. Sabrina Limon was found guilty of the first-degree murder of her husband, Robert Limon, along with charges for conspiracy, accessory, and solicitation to commit murder. And Sabrina was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for her husband's murder. A month later, Jonathan had his sentencing hearing, and during this time, he made a statement to Rob's family and his loved ones, and he said, and I quote, "I have sinned. I am guilty of choices that have torn awful wounds in many hearts, rippling destructively through so many precious lives. I have fallen terribly short of the standards of Jesus, who commands to serving each other and to be humble and to love one another. I have evoked God's name and yet behaved exactly opposite of his dictates. I have sinned. I am aware that for my crimes, anything other than death is merciful. Yet for my sin, I truly deserve much worse. I have wept and struggled looking for adequate words to express my repentance. It seems like saying that I'm sorry to you all will never be enough. And so speaking on borrowed and undeserved breath, I offer you my broken-hearted and genuine apology, knowing that it cannot compare to the grief that I've caused you." Sabrina and Rob's children live with Sabrina's sister, and the two families are very divided because a lot of them believe, obviously, that Sabrina's guilty, but Sabrina's sister and her kids don't believe that she is. Sabrina did even try to get a new trial already, and during this time for her trial, her kids wrote letters to the judge asking that their mom simply get probation instead of having to serve time in jail, which is just really, really sad. These poor kids losing both parents. But the judge did not grant her a new trial and her sentence remained. The judge said of this, and I quote, "Letters from the defense reiterate that the defendant is a kind and loving woman incapable of this crime. However, 12 jurors sat in that box and convicted her of the murder." And Sabrina's attorney says that they do plan to appeal again in the future, that they have plans to continue trying to appeal, but that they don't feel confident that it will be successful. So I guess only time will tell. But yeah, that's it, guys. That is the story of the murder of Robert Limon. What do you think? Isn't that just so messed up? It makes me so mad. This guy was literally just trying to work, just at his job, trying to support his family, who he loved and worked so hard for and did everything for, and he was just shot at work for no reason at all. It's so frustrating. And the fact that they said that they did it because of God's plan makes me so annoyed. I'm sorry, but it makes me so frustrated, the religious aspect of this, because I have such a problem with anyone who tries to justify doing something absolutely horrible for religious purposes. I think that that is the absolute worst. It reminds me like very, very loosely of Midnight Mass. Did you guys see that show? Well, actually it doesn't, because at least in Midnight Mass, those people thought they were doing something good. Jonathan and Sabrina knew they weren't doing something good. That's why they were riddled with guilt and had to pray about it all the time, because they knew what they were doing was awful. So these dicks were just selfish, dude. They were banking on the fact that they could do this and then ask for forgiveness and be saved. And that is gross. I am genuinely curious, though, on whether or not you think Sabrina was involved. I do personally think she was involved, but I can understand why somebody wouldn't, because the case they have against her is super flimsy and almost non-existent without the testimony of Jonathan. Like, there's no, like, direct evidence. I mean, there is a lot of things that if you look at them with critical thinking, you can put together a picture that's pretty fucking clear. But I can see why somebody would be on the fence about this one. But I don't know, because a lot of people who knew the couple and were around at that time and who knew them as people do think that she was involved. So I don't know, go back and forth. I mean, I don't. I think she did it, but I guess we'll call that the question of the day. Do you think Sabrina was involved, or do you think that Jonathan acted alone? Let me know down below. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I want to thank you for remembering Robert with me today, because he just sounded like a cool fucking dude. He sounded like the kind of guy that, I mean, everyone liked him. His family loved him, his friends loved him, and you can just tell what a loss he was for people based on everything that's ever said about him. Like, there's never a bad word, except for from his wife. And he was killed. And that's it. And you can't take it back, and he's gone forever for no reason. And that's really fucking sad. But that aside, please let me know of any cases you would like to see me cover down below. As you know, I have a long list of cases, but whenever you leave a suggestion, I put your name next to it first so that if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. And I love to see your suggestions because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Of course, if you haven't already, don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below for your convenience. I have an Instagram, a Twitter, a Facebook page, and a Facebook group, along with all of the lists, the list for all the makeup I use on my face, the earrings. If I was wearing nail polish, it would be listed there as well, but I'm not, because this is the third video I filmed this week, because I'm pre-filming for when this baby comes, which actually, I think you're watching this in April, so he may be here by now. Who knows? I'm pre-filming so much so that you guys don't miss any content while I am recovering from being split open like a sea bass. I don't even know what my point was. I just got lost on that. But yeah, you can check down below for all the links to everything. There's also a link to my merch store in case you want some sick merch so you can look fresh to death. And with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.